I'd like to welcome everyone to today's program, which I think will be a program of unusual interest. The Baker Institute of Public Policy is interested in domestic issues, it's interested in foreign issues, and in the foreign area, it has primarily been interested in the Middle East. We have emphasized conflict resolution, most recently in the promotion of a dialogue between the U.S. and Syria. We've had a number of conferences in which Israeli scholars and Palestinian scholars present ideas on various issues. We have, as one of our 14 funded fellowships, a Itzhak Rabin Fellow, ordinarily a fellowship held by an Israeli citizen. We have a Sabah Fellow, ordinarily a fellowship held by an Arab. We have had a number of papers that we have published from our own faculty, from visiting fellows, from participants in our conferences. The papers cover a tremendous variety of subjects, and if you're interested, I recommend you go on our website, and they're all readily available on that site. They cover subjects like the weapons of mass destruction from the Middle Eastern point of view, the Israeli point of view. We have a paper on the disposition of the waters of the Jordan. We have some papers on cultural trends in the Middle East and their effects on oil supply. Before the Gulf War, the second Gulf War, we had a paper called Iraq the Day After, which was a series of suggestions on what the United States might do after the defeat of Saddam Hussein. It was a paper that apparently nobody in the U.S. government bothered to read. We have, in other words, a long history of engagement with the Middle East, and so it's entirely appropriate today that we be the host of a delegation from Haifa, led by the president and the vice president of the university, and consisting of scholars who will present a panel today. It would be, I think, a mistake to believe that this panel will present the Israeli point of view on Middle Eastern issues, because as one of the guests reminded me today, you have two Jews, you have three opinions. And at lunch, that was proven quite dramatically by the vigorous conversation around the table. What you will have here is a group of scholars, each deeply learned in his field of study, who will present his own ideas on pressing issues regarding the Middle East. It's our pleasure to have in our company today the Consul General of Israel in Houston, Yael Ravia Zadak. She will make a few remarks and also introduce the president of Haifa University.
Thank you, Professor. It is a great honor to be here with you today, having an opportunity to take a closer look at the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A few days ago, we commemorated the terror attacks on September 11th, and it has been 10 years since we signed the Oslo Accords. Israel is still bleeding, and terror remains the main obstacle for peace. Israel, the only democracy in the region, was and still is determined to reach peace, to make painful concessions to get real peace. But with 865 dead and more than 5,000 injured Israelis, it is clear that as long as terror continues, no real peace can emerge. Israel is eager to encourage the moderate Palestinian voices that might be a potential partner for a joint future. And they are there, tied by a terrorist infrastructure that dictates its future, missing opportunities for reaching any peaceful agreement with Israel. Who will be the partner for peace? How can we support the efforts for peace? Will there be a Palestinian commitment to struggle decisively against terror? Is it necessarily going to be worse before it will be better? We might not have one clear answer, but I'm sure that today's conference will enable us all to be more familiar with the complexity and variety of the current Middle East reality. This conference is another expression of the growing academic cooperation between the Israeli Consulate in Houston, the Israeli universities, and the Baker Institute and Rice University. And on behalf of the Israeli Consulate in Houston, I would like to thank the Baker Institute for this magnificent opportunity and the Haifa University professors for coming to Houston and sharing with us your insights. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce the president of the University of Haifa University, Professor Yehuda Chayut. Professor Chayut, president of the University of Haifa for the last 10 years and chairman of the Council of Israeli University Presidents, is a world authority on shipping, ports, logistics, and international trade. He has special expertise in the fields of globalization, trade, transport, and the threat of terrorism. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And let me express on behalf of all my colleagues here our thanks to the Baker Institute and Rice University for hosting us today. And I'd like to thank the Consul General of Israel for helping to provide this opportunity to come and speak and debate a sensitive issue, an important issue today. University of Haifa is located on the northern part of Israel on the top of the Carmel Mountain, and it consists of about 15,000 students. 30% of them are graduate students. And among our main objectives, as many other universities, is academia, research, teaching, and we feel very proud of our achievement in the last years in that area. Just would like to mention that recently IBM in New York was selecting the University of Haifa as a site for a research center for their activities, their IBM activities worldwide. And actually, not too long ago, we have inaugurated 175,000 square feet of a laboratory, which is the largest one for IBM outside the United States, and we are very proud of that. We are located on the top of a high hill, and we have a tower, but we do not see ourselves as an ivory tower. Exactly the opposite. We feel, and we think this is one of the uniqueness of the university, that we are very deeply involved and committed for deep involvement in our society. That means in terms of social aspects, economic aspects, and also in the geopolitical events that are surrounding us. The Arab-Israeli conflict is not only an academic issue for us. We at the University of Haifa is the most pluralistic campus in Israel. We have in our campus some 18–19% of Arab-Israeli students. We have a large number of new immigrants from Russia, from Ethiopia. We are also the home of the Israeli Army, so-called West Point, and then we have a large center for national security. As a matter of fact, all of the top officers in the Israeli Army go through a master program in national security at our campus. And we have centers for Middle East studies and centers for the Persian Gulf studies, which is expanded recently. The fact that we are a pluralistic campus means that we have to deal with the Arab-Israeli issue on a daily basis and to confront questions, to confront various ideas, various opinions, political opinions, and we are very proud that despite the fact that we have a very emotional conflict in our region, we have managed to run a university with open discussions among youngsters, high emotions sometimes, but never in the last few years, definitely not in the time of the Intifada, with any significant problems of violence of any kind. And we see that as a model for coexistence, and we are being encouraged by the results. What we are planning to have today is to bring before you the foundings and of research of the panel, who are very well experienced and involved in the Middle East issue, which we believe can bring up some solution, some information, and some of their own conclusion, which can help in terms of argument people who support Israel and people who support the peace process in our region. I'm sure that this will be a fascinating debate and which will enrich all of us. Thank you very much.
All right, here are the ground rules for today's program. We have 5 panelists. Each of them gets 20 minutes. If everything goes smoothly, they will conclude at 6 o'clock, and at that point, the panel has agreed to answer questions for about another half hour. My job here is to remind professors who, as a group, are quite loquacious that their time is up, and I hope they will pardon me ahead of time if I actually try to fulfill my obligation. All right, the first speaker today is Professor Amatzia Baran. He's a professor of Middle Eastern history and director of the Jewish Arab Center at the University of Haifa. And he will talk to us on the subject of the Middle East and its formation in the modern era.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here and certainly to speak to you. My subject, my specialty, you might say, is really Iraq, contemporary, modern and contemporary Iraq. But of course, today, especially after the military operation in Iraq, after Iraq Freedom, Operation Iraq Freedom, you cannot separate the Iraqi case. Even beforehand it was somewhat artificial, but now you certainly cannot separate it from the wider Middle East arena. But I'll start, with your permission, with Iraq. My analysis is that you had little choice in the case of Iraq. Sooner or later, you would have had to conquer Iraq. Unless Saddam Hussein had voluntarily a heart attack and his children, would kill each other, which was possible in such a case, and his lieutenants would somehow not manage to keep the whole thing together. Chances for that were not very high. Saddam Hussein was very healthy, if some of you are worried. Still is very healthy, as I believe. And he's not going to die of a heart attack very soon. Certainly not had he been still in power. So the way I look at it, you would have had to conquer Iraq. And that would have to happen within the next few years and not in the very far distance. Not a very distant future. I can explain why, but I'll just say that's my analysis at least. But even though that now in the presidential election campaign, this is a very contentious issue. Should we, shouldn't we have gone into Iraq and so on? We opened the Pandora box and so on. To a large extent, I think this is water under the bridge. Politically, it's very relevant in your campaign, your presidential campaign, but when it comes to the Middle East, this is water under the bridge. First of all, as a result of the victory in Iraq, there were certain positive developments in the Arab-Israeli conflict, in the arena of the Arab-Palestinian conflict. Just to remind you, the roadmap is the result of the Gulf War, of the Operation Iraq Freedom. There was no way that President Bush could have come up with that kind of plan and that it would be accepted. And the good news is that between 60 and 70% of the Palestinians and around 70% of the Israelis accept the road plan, the roadmap. They do. Now, these are good news. It doesn't translate automatically into an agreement and lovey-dovey and so on, but these are good news. Most Arabs didn't like the war in Iraq and criticized the American administration for that war. Still do. So by conquering Iraq, you did not win the hearts of most Arabs. But you won the minds of, I think, the majority, or many, in the sense that American power has been demonstrated, but also American resolve. And as I said, this did contribute towards people's acceptance of the roadmap. In the Palestinian camp, many people until the war, many people still saw Saddam, maybe gullibly, but still saw Saddam as the one who would deliver them from bondage. Now, bondage doesn't mean the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Bondage in the minds of many Palestinians still means Israel's existence, very existence. And indeed, Saddam was the only Arab leader, including Gaddafi, who is not well known for his political, let's say, sanity, whatever. Saddam was the only Arab leader, head of state, who promised the Palestinians up front, above board, to destroy Israel, the state of Israel, to put all the Israelis in boats and send them back to Europe. He even showed readiness, he showed his generosity and humanity by saying that he's even ready to accept the Iraqi Jews who left Iraq, were forced to leave Iraq in 1950-51, back into Iraq. I don't know how many of them would have gone back, but he said it up front. It always reminds me, when I think about the way, Saddam is, by the way, not anti-Semitic. That's my analysis. Jews saved his life, he knows that, and his mother's life. He's not anti-Semitic. He doesn't hate Jews. By the way, he doesn't hate Shiites either. He doesn't hate Kurds. He just hates anybody who doesn't like him and who doesn't agree with him. And when he needs to kill Jews, he'll kill Jews. When he needs to kill Kurds, he'll kill Kurds, no problem. The way I think he looks at Jews is basically that he sort of, in a strange way, in his convoluted way, he even likes them. But he likes Jews the way a fisherman likes fish, basically. And so the Palestinians believe that he would deliver them completely. Not the Palestinians. Many of them are not gullible at all, but many did. This hope is dead now. It's good. It doesn't dawn on people very quickly, but it grows on people. That the last Arab leader who promised to destroy Israel and establish a Palestinian state over the whole area between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River is gone, hopefully forever. And finally, Saddam Hussein, as I'm sure you know, did pay $25,000 to every family whose son performed a suicide bombing operation, and that's a lot of money. I hear that even here in Houston, you can buy good lunch for $25,000. So, okay. So there was a contribution made by the campaign, recent campaign, to the Arab-Israeli conflict, to the resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict, but it's not translating itself automatically and easily, simply because the whole Iraqi component was no more than 10% or so of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. faith that Saddam would come to deliver them, money to suicide bombers, and so on and so forth, still 90% of the problem or so remains. And so it's not going to automatically solve the problem, and some people who said, oh, that's going to be the solution. That couldn't be the solution. Only some contribution. What about the situation now in Iraq and in the Middle East post-war period? I won't go into analyzing where the military and the administration did it right, where they did it wrong. They did some things right, some of the things they did wrong. I won't go into that. Anyway, it's a war situation, and Iraq, the only thing which I'd say, those who criticize the administration, and I sometimes do too, but with all our criticism, one has to remember one thing, that for 30 years this country has been ruled by the most vicious dictator on earth, except for Pol Pot. Pol Pot was worse. And you couldn't say, you couldn't argue, you couldn't discuss, you couldn't hear yourself thinking. And of course, if you do, you lose your tongue. He used to chop off your tongue. And then to let you bleed to death. That was the way he would treat anybody who would criticize him or his regime. So you have a problem there. You really don't know what people think, and you cannot accurately predict what would be the outcome of the liberation of Iraq. And many things surprised lots of people. And you have to understand that these things will happen in every case like that. So surprises are part of the plan. Iraq was a black box, or even more so, I would say, black hole, because it didn't emit any light. It didn't emit any sound. What will happen, and that's the main question, what will happen if America gets tired? And America has the right to get tired. It's perfectly legitimate, seen from an American viewpoint, to say, look, now we know he didn't have those things which most intelligence services in the world thought he had. Certainly CIA and DIA here did. I'm not going now into the hypes and, as the British put it, sexing up things. I'm not dealing with that at all. I'm just dealing with hard information, or what we believe to be hard information, that the CIA, DIA had, and MI6 as well. So now we know that he doesn't have it. We shall make sure he or anybody else will not be able to reconstruct it, rebuild it. Great. That was the main reason why we invaded Iraq, apparently. And so let's go back home. The US can make that decision. Question is, what will happen then? I'll start from the end. Under the worst case scenario, and I'll go to the worst case scenario here in a few seconds, the situation would still be better. It would be very bad, by the way. Don't get me wrong on that one. Very bad. But it will still be better than Iraq under Saddam for another 10 or 20 years. Substantially better. But it still would be very bad for the Middle East, and maybe possibly for America too, even though it's a legitimate decision. I see essentially two trajectories. There are at least 6 or 7, but I'll sort of try to be very giving it very broadly. 2 trajectories. One, there is still a possibility that Saddam Hussein will come back to power. You haven't yet caught him. And it's not so easy to catch him, and I can go into it, and give you another lecture why it is so difficult to catch him, but that's a fact, as you know. He might come back, and if he's caught, and I hopeful he would be, but if he's caught, some of his lieutenants are still at large. And the second level Ba'ath leadership is still at large by 70 or 90%, between 70 and 90%. They are there, and they know each other, and they can get organized. And they might be back, as Schwarzenegger says, they will be back. Well, that's one option. What will happen, I don't want to say, but that's not a good option. Another option is Iraq is splitting into 4 different parts, not 3, Sunni, Shia, Kurdish, 4. Shia state or statelet that will immediately be conquered by Turkey unless you defend the Kurds. Kurdish, I'm I'm sorry, I'm taking back, a Kurdish state in the north that will be immediately annexed by Turkey unless you defend the Kurds against the Turks. And that's a problem for you because you are allies, both of Turkey and the Kurds. They are the only ones who really want you to stay for as long as possible in Iraq. They are almost 20% of the population. It's meaningful, but it's not sufficient. That's one part. Another part is a Sunni Arab, triangle Sunni Arab zone, north and west of Baghdad, between Baghdad basically and Mosul, Baghdad and the Syrian border, Baghdad and the Jordanian border. That area will become a Sunni Arab area. Autonomous, independent, who knows what will be there, but they will have to seek support from the Syrians, and they will get it. And then you have a Shia area in the south, and they will seek support from the Iranians, and they'll get it with pleasure. And I don't think you want Iran to have influence. I don't think Iran will conquer the Shia south of Iraq, but the Iranians will then be the hegemonic power there, even if it's by remote control. And in the middle, you'll have Baghdad. Baghdad is a mixed city. You have 70% today of Baghdadis are Shiites. 25%, 23% are Sunnis, and the rest are Kurds, Christians, and so on. It's very rough assessment, but that's how I believe it is. And everybody needs Baghdad because Baghdad is the industrial, cultural, and administrative heart of Iraq. Without Baghdad, there is no Iraq. And over Baghdad, not over the south or center or north, but over Baghdad, you'll have civil war between Sunnis, Shias, Kurds, and God knows who else. With neighbors participating. That's not a good situation. Also, there is a reasonable chance that the Sunni Arab will become haven for Sunni Arab terrorism, like Osama bin Laden, like Al-Qaeda, like Abu Saif and others. The Shia area will become haven for Shia terrorism. Hezbollah is, of course, the obvious candidate. And the Kurdish area, if you stay there, it will be an independent Kurdish state. But then you are going to spoil your relations with the Turks, because the Turks are afraid that if the Kurds in Iraq are becoming independent, that's a very bad example in terms of Kurds who live in Turkey. They would seek independence as well. Big problem for the Turkish state. And so this is not a good situation. In other words, I believe that you can leave Iraq, but the price that the world will pay, the Middle East will pay, and maybe even you will pay, would be very, very high. Now, I would be the last one to set it $87 billion or $90 or $100 billion this year and $100 billion next year. Is something that is easy for any American to pay. Because I know exactly how, I've been living here for a few months now, and I'm going to live here for another 11 months, and I'd like America to be well. Not only because I live here, because I love America. And America, well, if you have one superpower in the world, it better be America. I'll just put it this way. So, the price is heavy. Economically, it's much heavier in terms of human lives. And I don't need to be told what it means to lose a brother or a father. I lost my own brother in a war against Egypt, and I can tell you, you never, ever, ever forget it. It's with you 24 hours a day until the day you die. And so the tragedy of every single American family that is losing its son or daughter in Iraq is horrendous. And the only way to look at it is, and to say, yes, you still need to stay in Iraq, at least the way I see it, until things stable there, is that the price you might pay if you don't do that might be higher. That's the only justification I can suggest, or I have. To sum it up, it seems to me, and finally, when Iraq is stabilized, and in my assessment, we'll meet here in 3 years and see if my assessment was correct. But in my assessment, if you do the right thing in Iraq, and say about it just two sentences or three, a semi-democratic Iraq, I'm not even talking about a democratic, liberal, US-style or British-style Jeffersonian democracy. I'm talking about a semi-democratic Iraq, and it may be even better than that. and the semi-secular Iraq, semi-secular, it will never be more than semi-secular, and a peaceful Iraq, which is very possible, this can certainly happen, will be such a bonus to the Middle East that it is impossible to exaggerate its importance. On the Israeli-Palestinian struggle, conflict, it can have a very positive influence, because when an Iraqi cabinet minister, foreign minister, even prime minister, elected, legitimized in the eyes of the world, is helping negotiate an Israeli-Palestinian peaceful arrangement that will add to the moderate countries who are now trying to do this job not very successfully, especially Egypt. Pardon? Yeah, thank you. Egypt and Jordan, but to an extent also Saudi Arabia. When it comes to the Middle East, I don't think the Middle East is going to become tomorrow morning democratic if Iraq becomes democratic. I don't think so. It will take very long. It's a good example, but it will take time. But the immediate impact will be on Iran, because Iran, unlike what many people believe, Iran has a long democratic tradition, very interesting, starting by the turn between the 19th and 20th century. Off and on, off and on. And in Iran, you have now a democratic, fairly liberal students' movement and youth movement. And the example of Iraq will be so influential in Iran because the Iranians and the Iraqis are by majority Shia. And that's the connecting link. Did I forget something? I'm sure I did. Yes, only one thing, what to do about Iraq. Well, basically we know what to do. Your administration by now knows what to do. But what I would say to the American public is this. If you don't pour, P-O-U-R, gold, and I mean money, greenbacks, on Iraq now, and I mean tomorrow morning, not waiting 6 months or 9 months, tomorrow morning, not only the Sunni Arabs will be shooting at you, the Shi'i Arab will start shooting at you. Sunni Arabs are a problem, and I would just recommend there more whip and more carrot on the Sunni Arabs. They are your enemy. And you have to find a way of winning them over, but both whip and carrot, the combination usually is a winning combination. More. When it comes to the Shiites, I would say just forget about the whips. There is no need for any whips. They are not shooting at you. They are sitting on the fence waiting. And the most marvelous summation, if you wish, of the Shi'i position now came from a few people in Basra city, Basra town, in the southern part of Iraq, a Shi'i city, huge city, who were interviewed by Western journalists who actually can speak Arabic. And about 5 or 6 of them said the same thing. They said, right now we are still waiting. But we are getting mad because the heat is killing us. It's 125 degrees in the shade. The question, if it is 125 degrees in the shade, why are they still sitting in the shade? But that's a different question. They are telling you, the heat, no electricity, no air conditioning, no water, no sewage, and no security, safe personal security in the streets. All these things are driving us crazy. Now, you Brits, the Brits are in Basra, as you know, you promised us, the Brits never did, but it doesn't matter. You promised us to improve things really just like that, presto, and you didn't, which means you don't care enough about us. Or maybe you want to punish us for something. That's the way they look at it. So, either you fix everything for us real fast, or we kill you. Now, that's not very mature, some of you would say.
Now, that's not a very happy note on which to conclude, but perhaps we should.
Right. I'll just say that that's what you would have to understand is the mood in the Shi'i areas. They are still on your side in a way, but you don't have a lot of time. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Professor Arnon Sofer, Professor of Geography and Vice Chairman of the National Security Studies Center at the University of Haifa. He will talk to us this afternoon about Israel, demography, and its implications on limited resources.
Dear moderator, dear distinguished guest, good afternoon. In my 20 minutes talk, I would like to emphasize, of course, demography, which is a very unpleasant story in the Middle East at large and Israel specifically. I would mention some implications, and of course, it will be needed some quick, urgent recommendation, and maybe I will focus on the most well-known now, the unilateral separation. But let me start just for the general knowledge of all of us with a general map of the world at large, which I think explain part of what we face at the moment, whether it's Iraq or the tragedy in New York and much more. I don't like the United Nations system to see forecasting more than 20 years and to talk about 100. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. We don't have any choice but to prepare ourselves with highways and power station, and therefore we need to calculate our steps 20 years ahead, but no more. So I like to see only the next 20 years, and I have some problems here. For hundreds of years, we have seen the world population very high natural increase, very high death rate, and therefore the population was more or less stagnated for centuries. Something very interesting happened immediately after the Second World War. Those of you who are familiar with the F-16, how he ran, and in a second he take off, and it's less than half a second he's 30, 40, 60,000 feet above. This is what happened with the world population at the moment. And for the next 10, 20 years, the picture is very grim, in spite of the fact that we know that in many countries we can see a reduction in the natural increase. We have what it's called the demographic momentum. The moment we have so many children, thousands will enter the fertility rate, the fertility age, and we'll see more and more, at least in the next 20 years, many children. But we have another very important element, and this is this curve. This is the developed world. Europe in zero or minus growth. Germany will be, in another 20 years, less 2 million people. Even the Catholic country of Italy, minus growth. And totally talking, we are talking about zero growth. So it means the whole population of this world is going to be what we call developing countries, in other words, poor countries. And the question, how this group of people can solve the problem here. And I emphasize it because I'm very sensitive what is going on at the moment in France and in Spain, and those countries which are very close to Morocco and Algeria. And some expert will tell me that for Spain, it's existential threat, the invasion of people from Morocco. And in fact, in the coast of Spain, they are building now fences. Don't know how it will happen there, but this is the situation. And the question, and I'm very cynic by asking my question, when France will be part of the Arab League? This is the question. Because at the moment it's 10 million people, and it's increasing. And the same story in many other countries. So this is just an example. This is in the global scale. And now I would like to share with you only 1 second what's going on in the Middle East at large, and then we will be ready to understand the problem of what I call Palestine/Greater Israel. Don't be afraid from the Hebrew. What's important are the figures. What I'm doing here, this is the total population of the Middle East. It took about 100 years to double the population in this area, 18 to 19. It took about 50 years, the population exactly doubled itself in 50 years. It took the region in 30 years to double itself again. And the forecasting for the next 30 years, the Middle East is going to double itself again. Can you imagine that Egypt or Iran can produce another Egypt in 30 years, another Cairo, another Alexandria, another 100,000 kilometers of canals, to produce another Nile, because the Nile is drying up at the moment. And still we have difficulties with Ethiopia and Sudan, the hydropolitics of the Nile. Is it feasible? And if yes, these people in another 30 years, or now only the last 10 years, they will reach $600 or $1,000 per capita. And if not, God forbid, what we will hear. So we face some dramatic problems. And as I'm very sensitive to Israel, I can tell you that at the moment, around Israel, close to our borders, we have about 12 million people. In less than 17 years from now, we'll see around 26 million people around close to Israeli borders. And then the question of water and ecology and much, much more. This is a problem. This is not the right time to discuss reasons. And now I'm coming to the main issue that bothered me for many years, and it was difficult to convince my lovely friends, Prime Minister, since Rabin up to this moment. Finally, I did it, and I would like to share with you some information on this issue, which is so important. And just 4 or 5 numbers, which are really important. First of all, we are at the moment 6.5 million people in Israel. Israel means in the pre-67 war boundaries. In another 17 years from now, and you have it in my monograph if you take it, we will see additional 2.5 million people in a state that at the moment is with the highest density in the Western world. So it's very harsh, it's very difficult. Talking about Jews, which means developed people with maybe 1 and 1.5 children per mother in the next 20 years. We follow America, but not Europe. We will see additional 1.3 million people. That's all. While talking about the Israeli Arabs, and I emphasize the Muslims, they will double themselves in around 20 years. Still, this modern society with 3.5% natural increase, which means doubling time of about 23 years. Again, many reasons how it happened. The highest natural increase on earth, with one exception, is the Israeli Bedouin. Bedouins in the Israeli society still buying women. Buying women. Can you imagine today in our modern life, a father with 150 children? Is it moral? You know, it's a business. Because we, with our welfare system, we pay for every child. We encourage them to produce children, not to have children. The salary, double of mine, as full professor. Unbelievable. And so, the forecasting, the Bedouin, not just more than double themselves, in less than 17 years. It's 5%, which means every 10 years doubling population. Impossible to plan. Until you finish to draw a map, you have to change the map. This is more or less like Gaza, from different reasons. In Gaza, nobody has a welfare system. Another story, Israel without borders. I can blame my government. For 35 years, we don't have borders between Israel and the West Bank. So people are coming. Why not? Not because of national reasons, just for a third world country to a first one. You have experience in your country, not far from Texas. Same reasons. And the numbers are amazing. At the moment, I have to change. I was optimistic before coming. It's around 300,000 Arabs penetrate inside Israel. It's for us huge numbers. So talking about total population, 7 million people, together with the foreign workers, and we are losing the majority. I'm talking inside Israel. But we don't have border, and still there is a debate about the territories. So please see what's going on in the territories. In the territories, Gaza, this small territory, I calculate Gaza is fifth Houston. Fifth the size of Houston. Remember, 20% of Houston. Today, 1.3 million people. In less than 17 years, they will double themselves. More. 2.6 million miserable, poor people. And this is, for me, seeing it from geopolitical perspective, this is a real existential threat. The same story with Judea and Samaria or West Bank. And we will see. So today, we have altogether in Palestine / Greater Israel, 10 million people. And the numbers are 50-50. And it's difficult to convince my governments and Knesset members that this is a catastrophe. We are losing the Jewish majority in Palestine. What about the forecasting? Jews with 1.4 children, 2 children. I have personal story. I have 3 girls. I can tell you how it was difficult to convince them to bring me some grandchildren. They are so busy all the time, and career, and you know the story. In addition, we have 3 years in the army. So we will see in 17 years from now, additional 6 million people in this teeny region. More of them poor, Palestinians and Jewish ultra-Orthodox. So here I have 2 very important conclusions. One, Israel is losing the majority and our right because it's suddenly become South Africa. In another 17 years, we will be just 40% of the population. This is not a Jewish state. Second, I have a problem. What I call ecology is suddenly a question of national security. Because I grow my children and my grandchildren with your Nikes and your computers and your modern style of society. They will not live in a developing country. And they will leave Israel, and you will find them in Houston. And I would like to see them there. We have a wonderful, wonderful country. So here I have two different threats. From inner point of view, ecological disaster. From national point of view, the existence of a Jewish state. And I'm Zionist, and I'm there for being in a Jewish Zionist state. So these are the demographic most important element. But I have another issue that I would like to share with you. I am a geographer, and because in a moment you will understand why I recommend or I am behind, and I'm one of the initiators of the unilateral separation. Why? Because if I take the red color, this is the territory of the Palestinians, which means Gaza, West Bank, part of Israel, the Galilee, the Bedouins in this area with 5% natural increase, in around 3 million Palestinians in Jordan. King Hussein was here, God forbidden, 1 bullet in his head. And we will see this as one united Palestinian territory. It bothers me. I wish them all the best, but I have my own problem. For example, I need the Jordan Valley as a wedge between the West Bank and Jordan, for example. Just one example. So these are the problems that bother us, and the media, the TV, nobody discuss it. This is the story, Of course, I'm coming to some recommendations. From the inner point of view, it's to say our government day and night, listen that ecology, quality of life is national security, is equal to aeroplanes, Air Force, or the armor units. This is what I'm doing in the National Defense College, day and night. Quality of life will keep my grandchildren in Israel. Or much more, will bring the Jews of France very soon to Israel, if we are developed country, not developing, because of the disaster what's waiting for them in this Muslim Arabic state. This is my opinion, of course. And the tension is very, very high. And now coming to the most problematic one, and the media is talking day and night on the issue. If you open the newspapers, Israel is building a wall, a fence, a barrier, Bantustan, apartheid. The moment we decided to build a wall and to withdraw, no, don't do it. I have some very interesting question about the issue. What happened? Why they criticize us? As these are the figures, and as Israel is flooded by thousands of Arabs, I would like to see this kind of a map, and I know immediately you will ask me, why not back to the green line, to the pre-line 67 line? I have a problem. First of all, demographic issue. And after 35 years of vacuum, of no finding any partner to negotiation, and the fact that this is not just another land, it's the cradle of the Jewish nation. We have the settlers with all what is behind, with Jerusalem, with Hebron. You are talking with a secular Jew, but I have to understand them as well. So I have a problem. I have another military or security issue. One example. When we occupied, unwillingly, to remember 67 war, we asked Jordan, don't shell us, and they did it. Every aeroplane who lands today in Lida Airport here, one remark, sorry, because I'm talking to Houstonian people. This, to give you some scale, this is the Bush International Airport, and the lecture is here in the boundary. In my case, or in your case, you land in Bush, you go to the border, you return back to Tel Aviv, and then you come back. This is the distance from Bush International Airport to this hall. You travel to the border and back 3 times. This is the size of Israel. From here to here, 15 kilometers. Unbelievable. This is our size. Please remember. So what I need, I have to annex this area that no one will be able to send what it called SAM 7 that can hit the aeroplane as they tried to do it in Mombasa just 2 months ago. We have a problem. We cannot take risks when an aeroplane is landed in Israel. This is, and a jumbo was not exist in 67. So there are some modern situations that we have to adopt. Please understand. And then I have a problem with my settlers. And I have to take decision to see a civil war or to find some compromises. And in my map, tell you the truth, when Sharon was elected, he called me the same evening to give him my map. I work with my colleagues in our institution. And in my map, with all the difficulties, I have to withdraw from about 50 settlements. This is what Sharon called very painful price for a peace. But just another remark. The moment we will see unilateral separation, it means we will need to rebuild the corridors that combine Gaza with the West Bank, and corridors, to those of you who are not historians, remember Danzig Remember Berlin corridor. This is a tragedy by itself. And I have reason why I mention it. And as I mentioned before, from geopolitical reasons, I don't want to see continuation between the West Bank and Jordan. We have to be here, not because of a threat from Iraq, no more. Usually we call it the Eastern Frontier. No, this is not the issue. It's only demography. And now I have a problem with Jerusalem. Many friends here maybe will not be happy. I don't understand why I need Eastern Jerusalem excluding the most important holy sites of the Jewish people. So I'm ready to annex the cemetery and some other places and to cut even Jerusalem. I don't need 250,000 Palestinians without any historical ground to annex Israel. So this is really tough decisions. And if I want a Jewish Zionist state, as you have seen with the demography, this is what we need urgently, immediately. Now you ask me, okay, why you don't wait for negotiation? So for 1 minute, I would like to represent Mr. Arafat or one of the Palestinian leaders. They know exactly the figures that I just gave you. Simply my work was translated in Ramallah the day after it was published here. We cannot hide figures. And in fact, after another article of mine, Arafat said that the Palestinian woman is a biological bomb. A biological bomb. They use demography as a weapon. Why Arafat will take this map? Think for a moment, and you know, ignore my map. Go back to the 67 war map. Why should he accept corridors, Gaza, West Bank, just to wait, to negotiate for another 5 years, and Israel will disappear anyhow? Now, maybe some of you will raise their eyes and say, no, no. Just the last remark. Do you know that during the Camp David negotiation, our Prime Minister, my good friend Barak, proposed him almost 97% of all the territories. And Arafat said no. Why? And since the 30s, the 40s, they said no. Because they want all of Palestine. So I have no partner, and therefore I need a unilateral separation quickly as possible. Of course, who doesn't like the idea? The settlers from the right wing, the Israeli Arabs, and some of the Israeli left wing from the left, and the Arabs, and I don't understand why, because it's going to be a barrier, and to tell them, we are here forever. And then we will have time to deal with ecology.
30 seconds.
I finished. Thank you.
The next speaker is Dr. Ami Petitsur. He's a lecturer in political science and the Deputy Director of the National Security Studies at the University of Haifa. His topic is recent trends in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the spectrum of political positions in Israeli society.
Here is problematic. But the computer, the screen is... Good afternoon. Unfortunately, I'm not going to discuss a more optimistic topic. What I'm going to present here is some data, some trends and developments in Palestinian terrorism over the last 55 years. At the National Security Studies Center in Haifa, we have the largest data set on Palestinian terrorism against Israeli targets, which includes, I'll discuss it in a moment, many variables, including geographical, operational, demography and socio-economic background of the perpetrators. We currently concluded a study of the profile of the victim of terrorism, which is very interesting. And what we are basically doing is asking trained students to follow the newspapers since the day Israel was established. And whenever they found a terrorist incident, they had to go to a code book and to answer 66 questions. And then we coded it into a statistical software. By now, we have 2,622 events which give us a clear picture about different trends in this phenomenon. First of all, I'm going to show you just the numbers. How did Palestinian terrorism develop over the last 55 years? And to be honest, I'm not that afraid of the numbers, though they are quite impressive, especially if you take a look at the last 3 years. It's not the quantity that matters, it's the quality. And what I'm going to emphasize is that Palestinian terrorism is what we refer to now as new terrorism, mass casualty terrorism. It's not the terrorism of the 1960s and 1970s that was aimed at drawing the world attention to the Palestinian cause. This kind of terrorism is Al-Qaeda terrorism. The sole aim of these attacks is to kill as many people as possible in every possible way. If we take a look at the geographical aspects, we can see that over the years, terrorism has moved mostly to Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem, and over the last years, Haifa is becoming also a target for terrorism. And this is very important because these are highly populated urban centers, and we have to think of ways to protect the Israeli population, both Jews and Arabs, and to cope with smart bombs, suicide bombers who are going into highly populated areas and explode themselves and at the time and place that they choose, and with as many victims as possible. And we can definitely see that over the decades, terrorism has become more and more urban. If back in the 1950s we had the Fidaeins who attacked cars on the roads, today we don't see this phenomenon anymore. Most of the attacks are aimed at cities. Just to give you some figures that I was amazed to find about terrorist events inside Israel and beyond the Green Line, what we saw is that most of the attacks during the years of the Al-Aqsa Intifada are occurring beyond the Green Line, meaning that most of the victims are settlers. However, this is not the whole picture, because the terrorism inside Israel is more lethal. Settlers are suffering from shooting incidents, from stabbing, etc. Inside Israel, we face mostly suicide terrorism and the use of explosive devices. If we take a look at the operational aspects, we can see some very interesting trends. We just divided it by gunfire, use of explosives, and suicide attacks and cold weapons. And what you see, and unfortunately, the figures, the green line, we concluded the study a few months ago, and today it's on the rise, meaning the tactics that is developing steadily is using suicide terrorists. And we'll show it in the next few slides and how devastating it is. If you take a look, these are the numbers of suicide attacks since the first attack. First attack took place in Pesach, Passover 1993, and then the Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad used suicide terrorism to do everything to sabotage the peace process. It was highly developed following the Oslo Accords. What you can see is that over the last 2 years, it became much bigger, and this is because the Fatah, formerly a nationalist organization that mostly used traditional terrorist tactics, became a very prominent actor in the arena of suicide terrorism. And I'm talking about the Shuhada al-Aqsa, the Tanzim, all these are names of the Fatah organization led by Yasser Arafat. Now just take a look at the number, the average number of victims per attack if we compare different tactics. And what I'm talking about victims here, these are not only dead but also wounded. Any person who came to the hospital or died during the attack. If we take cold weapons, meaning knives, axes, etc., the numbers are 1.6. Shooting is a little higher, 3.7, and bombs are 8.37. When we move to cars that are being driven by suicide terrorists, the average number is 43.6. And when we are going to the most common tactic, a person who carries a belt full of explosives and all kinds of metal pieces that are causing a much bigger damage, the number is almost 60 people per attack. Now, this is very important, and many people do not know these numbers. If we take a look at the years of the Oslo years, 1993 till 1999, we see that the organizations that led most of the attacks were the Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Both are organizations that are devoted to fundamentalist Islamic theology, and in trying to make it clear for American audience, they are pretty much affiliated to the ideas of Al-Qaeda. These organizations are not struggling the Palestinian struggle. They are not fighting for an independent state. They are fighting against the Western civilization. And if you read the writings of Hamas leaders, you can see it clearly. They say, first, we'll take the occupied territories, then Israel, and then the world. The Fatah was different. The Fatah had a doctrine that said, first, the territories, then Israel, and over the Oslo years, it became clear that the Fatah will be satisfied with an independent Palestinian state. However, it all changed, and as you can see, between 2000 and 2003, the Fatah became the second most prominent actor in the scene of suicide terrorism, and this is not a religious fundamentalist organization. In a few minutes, I'll explain why we think that the Fatah joined this arena. Just to give you a few indications about what is being attacked by terrorism and suicide terrorism, and I want to emphasize the green line, which is the lowest one but most dangerous. We see that there are different targets. Mostly, we look at individuals and transportation. However, over the last few years, some organizations became active in the field of trying to hit infrastructure facilities. And only a year ago, Hamas people planted an explosive device on a fuel truck which entered Piglilot. Piglilot is the largest petrol facility in center Israel, and this place is located between Herzliya and Ramat Aviv. The bomb went off. However, it was in the wrong place. I spoke to the person who runs this facility, and he told me that in any other location, the northern part of Tel Aviv and Herzliya would have been erased from the map due to the effect, the force multiplier. First the car, then the whole reservoir of petrol and gas. So today we see that these organizations are become more and more aware of force multipliers. And this is copycatting. These people are highly influenced by Osama bin Laden and by the 9/11 attack. And they want to capture this strategy to cause as much damage as possible using quite simple techniques. And this is something that we have to protect ourselves from. And here I'd like to show you something that is a little bit optimistic. We know that many of the suicide bombers were interested in hitting shopping malls. And it's very clear. Shopping malls are closed spaces with many people, so the effect can be amazing. However, over the years, Israel became aware of it, and many of the owners of the shopping malls decided to secure them and to put many security guards at the entrance. And you see that compared to other targets, shopping malls are less targeted today because the terrorists know that it's almost impossible to hit a shopping mall, so they don't try. This gives us a clue about how we should protect ourselves and what we should do in order to minimize the attempts to attack other targets. I don't have the time to give you the whole picture of Palestinian terrorism over the years, but I would like to emphasize that we had a lot of literature written about the different organizations that were established. However, the most important organizations are the new ones. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which was established by Dr. Fathi Shkaki in 1981, and the Hamas, established by Ahmad Yassin in 1987. These two organizations are the leaders of Palestinian terrorism today, while the Fatah is actually trying to catch them. Now I'm going to show you some numbers drawn from public opinion polls that were done by Khalil Shkaki, the brother of Fathi Shkaki, who is a serious political scientist working in Ramallah. You see that the Palestinian popular support for the armed struggle is quite high. Over the years, it increased, and what is important is not the 90% who support the armed struggle doctrine in 2002, but the 21, 38, and 50% who supported this doctrine during the years of the Oslo Accords. It means that the idea of an armed struggle against Israel never left the political arena, the Palestinian political arena, and this is not a very good sign. If we are talking about terrorist attacks against civilian population, please take a look at these numbers. What we see, especially over the last 2 years, during the years of the Intifada, is a majority of the Palestinians who believe that part of the struggle should include attacks against civilians. Again, it gives us a picture that, first of all, these people support the tactics of the Islamic fundamentalist organization, and second, that there is no peace climate, and actually that there was no peace climate, even in the 1990s, in the Palestinian National Authority. And now, I would like to give you our answer to the question, why did the Fatah become so involved in suicide attacks? In 2002, for the first time, the Hamas and the Jihad were more popular than the Fatah among Palestinians. Meaning, in other words, Arafat, Marwan Barghouti, and others had no choice. They wanted to assure their political survival. Therefore, instead of fighting Hamas, who is becoming a very important actor in the Palestinian arena, they decided to compete. And they decided not only to adopt the strategies, but the rhetoric and even the name. Fatah, for the first time, is using a religious name, Shuhada al-Aqsa, the martyrs of Al-Aqsa. And this is very similar to the names of the military wings of Hamas, Izzadin al-Qassam battalions, named after the martyr Izzadin al-Qassam, or the Islamic Jihad Al-Quds battalion, named after Jerusalem. So the Fatah is competing for political survival, and the way to do it is by adopting this deadly idea. And now I'll show you what happened in terms of the organizations which are active in terrorism over the years. And I think you see that in the 1960s, the Fatah was, of course, the most active organization, the largest component of the PLO. In the 1970s, the years of international terrorism, left-wing terrorism, the left-wing fronts became active too, but these were mostly events that were aimed at the media and TV. They wanted to draw as much attention as possible. In the 1980s, we see a little shift. The Popular Front, the left-wing organizations, are not as active following the collapse of the Soviet bloc. However, we see a new actor, the Islamic Jihad. Take a look at the red bar. The Hamas was established in 1987. By the 90s, it became the most active organization in the scene of terrorism, meaning this organization was formed very quickly and became the deadliest organization we knew. And take a look, please, what happened following the Al-Aqsa Intifada. The Fatah and the Fatah people who became part of the Palestinian political establishment, part of the Palestinian security forces, rejoined the terrorist arena, and today we see that 41% of the events are carried out by the Fatah people. And the Hamas went to the second place. For those who are tired, this is the last slide. So. Just want to emphasize two things, and I'm going to conclude. First, please take a look at the blue bar. It's not overwhelming, but it's alarming. We see that over the years, the involvement of Palestinian citizens of Israel in terrorism is increasing steadily. This is something that the Israeli government should be aware of. And I'm not a politician, I have no strong political views, but I think that there are both peaceful and militant ways to deal with this phenomenon. And I think that this is a scary thing, because even if we'll have a wall, it will not protect us once we have terrorism inside Israel. Second, and I don't have it in the chart, a few months ago, 2 terrorists came to Israel from London. They were from Pakistani origin, and they were affiliated to the Al-Qaeda organization. These 2 men came to a pub known as Mike's Place and activated an explosive device. One of them committed suicide. We know today that this device included all kinds of chemical materials. What I would like to emphasize is that Al-Qaeda is involved in Israel too, and that all these Al-Qaeda affiliated organizations, whether Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Abu Sayyaf, and other organizations, are not only fighting for a Palestinian cause. Please do not take Osama bin Laden too seriously. If you read his fatwa from the 1990s, this person is in a struggle with the West. And so are the religious fundamentalist organization in the Palestinian scene. And I think that the whole Western world should unite and do something against these organizations before it will be too late. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Professor Joseph Ginott, Professor of Cultural Anthropology and Archaeology, and also he's the co-director of the University of Oklahoma Center for Peace Studies. His topic this afternoon is the Palestinian refugee problem, its creation, and possible solution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to concentrate on 2 subtopics. And before getting to the Palestinian refugee issue, which is the most difficult issue, as far as I understand, that we'll have to deal with, but this will be part of the negotiations. this will be actually after that we can implement the roadmap. But first we need an introduction to the roadmap. And I want to dwell on a proposal for this introduction, and then a proposal how to solve the most difficult issue, the Palestinian refugee problem. When the Intifada started, and we heard about it from two speakers, the Americans wanted to try and find a solution, how to stop the uprising, how to stop the killing, how to stop the suicide bombing. The first person that was changed with a proposal was George Mitchell, and here's his proposal. Nothing happened. There was no solution. After George Mitchell, George Tenet was sent. And he came also with a proposal, some modifications to the first proposal. But there was no solution to the problem. Nothing was changed. Then it was General Zinni, came with the authority of a general, but the Intifada continued. Not only that, at the time of the visits of each one of them, there were more attacks on Israel, more suicide attacks. So in order that we can start the first articles of the roadmap, we need a ceasefire. But how do we reach a ceasefire? We saw that all these proposals, Western ideas of the Western world, didn't work. Ceasefire not always worked in the Western world. There was a French general that later became a president, General de Gaulle in France, and he said once in a beautiful French language, he said, ceasefire can be compared to beautiful young girls and flowers. They last as long as they last. And this is what happened to many ceasefires, that sometimes it didn't last even for one day. You know, in Liberia, the United Nations sent many delegates, and when the ceasefire, only several weeks ago, was signed, the following day there were 1,100 people dead in the streets of the cities. Now, as a student of the Arab culture, and I represent myself and present the proposal as a scholar, as a student of the Arab culture, I think that in negotiation, we have to learn the culture of the other. We have to know the culture of the other party. If it is in trade, if it is in commerce, if it is in war, and in parentheses, I will penetrate to Professor Amatsia Baram's field, Iraq, and I say that had the Americans known more about Arab culture, they could have saved casualties, and I'm talking about the period after the war up till present. We have to learn the culture of the Arabs. They have to learn our culture. But in the Arab culture, there is an ancient concept of ceasefire that when such a ceasefire was signed, it was kept. It's an Arabic term, and the term is hudna. And such a ceasefire was between tribes, between clans, between sub-federations of tribes, and between federations of tribes. And whenever this hudna was signed, they kept it. So this was between Arabs and Arabs. In the Middle Ages, in the time of the Crusaders, it started to be between Muslims and non-Muslims. And it was between Muslims and Christians, and there were 8 times such hudnas in the time of the Crusaders between the Crusaders and the Muslims. 4 times the Muslims asked for it, and 4 times the Crusaders asked for it. The famous one was in Jaffa, that was for 8 months. But no one broke it. It was never broken between the dates it was signed. And I'll jump to the 19th century. We don't have time to analyze it, but I gave you the data. In the 19th century, there were 2 cases. One case was in Algeria, when there was the rebellion against the French people, and this was in the time of Abdelkader, the famous leader of the rebellion. Abdelkader rebelled against the French in 1832, and in 1834 they signed the first Hudna. The Crusaders didn't know about Arab culture. The Crusaders didn't know about the Muslim culture. The French people didn't know about the Muslim culture, but they found out that maybe if they'll use such a term, they might succeed to have a ceasefire. And there were 3 times ceasefires between 1832 to 1837. The last one that I want to dwell on for a minute is in 1860, the 26th of December, in northern Morocco, in Tetuan. There was a war between the Spanish people and the Moroccans. What was the outcome? A Hudna. Not a ceasefire, but a Hudna, which is actually a ceasefire. And this was signed on the 26th of December, 1860. And this led to a peace agreement between Spain and Morocco. In 1948, when Israel had the ceasefire between all the Arab countries that attacked Israel when they didn't agree to the partition plan, to the partition proposal of the United Nations of 1847, there were talks in the island of Rhodes under the auspices of the United Nations. It was Ralph Bunche, was the director of the entire discussions there. And Israel signed a ceasefire with Egypt, and this was the armistice agreement: Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. So it was armistice. What was written in the Arab newspapers all over the Middle East? When there was a ceasefire, there is a word in Arabic, and I understand that some here understand Arabic, waqf al-nar, to stop fire. But in Arabic, they use the term hudna, so that the entire Arab countries, the other population, the entire population will understand that there is a ceasefire for a long term. Two years and 4 months ago, I proposed this idea. There was a public poll in Israel. 28% of the Israelis supported the idea of having such a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I'm talking to Israel and the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian authorities had to take care of the terrorist organizations, that they will obey. In July of 2003, there was another public poll by Tel Aviv University, Professor Ephraim Yar, who did the first public polls. Actually, he does it every month. He calls it the Peace Index. And 72% of the Israelis were for the idea of using this term as a ceasefire. The question, what can we lose? Give it a try. Either you succeed or you don't succeed. You don't go backwards. Either you succeed, and then you can start with the roadmap. So this can be an introduction to the roadmap. Now, if you didn't succeed with all the ideas, all the proposals of the best brains, the best ideas of the people who were sent by the United States government, we can swallow pride. Nothing will happen. One can call it a watch, another one can call it glasses or a shoe. or a pen, so what? You can use the term hudna. So my proposal is to try to use the hudna with the support of the Arab leaders, with President Mubarak, with King Abdullah, who visited your institute, and to try to use this term and to come to a full ceasefire for 1 year. Within this ceasefire period, you can start working according to the roadmap to dismantle the infrastructure of the terrorist organizations, and on the other hand, to dismantle the unauthorized outposts that Israel signed that will dismantle them. And then come the other steps, and you know, you read it, it was in many newspapers, on television, the ideas of the roadmap. So this I see as an introduction, but we have to start with something. And I see it as the only solution so far to get out of the chaos, to get out of the bloodshed. You cannot talk under suicide bombings. Now, very, I would say, knowledgeable people on security in Israel said that if we sign a ceasefire agreement under Islamic terms, religious terms, there are more chances that it will hold than if we go again to the Western world proposals for ceasefire. Now, if we start the roadmap and we start the discussions, we'll come to the most difficult issues in order to reach peace. Ceasefire is the key. This is important. If we reach it, then we can do several things. First of all, you know that before the Second Intifada, there were about 117,000 Palestinians, refugees and not refugees, who worked in Israel daily. They could support their families. They could feed their families. With the Intifada, the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, they don't let them to go out to work. But if you reach a ceasefire, or I should add that we do have workers. We do have guest workers from where? From China, from Thailand, from Romania, from Hungary, from Turkey and other countries. And the numbers are about 250,000, 250,000 workers from those countries that I have mentioned. Why not have the Palestinian work? I would rather have the Palestinians, that they will work in Israel daily, than the Romanians and the Hungarians. I wish them well, but I would like the Palestinians to replace them. But the precondition is a ceasefire. The precondition is to stop the fight, to stop the suicide bombing. So if we reach it, and we started that there will be an introduction to coexistence, then we could talk about borders, we can talk about water, and water is very, very important and very important issue. We can talk about the status of Jerusalem, and I climb up the Palestinian refugee issue. You see, Jerusalem is not an easy issue, but it is less difficult to solve, as far as I understand, than the Palestinian refugee issue. This is the most difficult issue out of all the other issues. And first of all, remember, there were negotiations with the Egyptians, and we have a peace agreement with them. There were negotiations with the Jordanians, and we have a peace agreement with Jordan. It was not easy, but we signed the peace agreement with both countries. It is not the most desirable peace agreement. It is not like the peace between the United States and Canada, but I'd rather have a cold peace than a warm war. There were discussions with the Syrians, twice. Once in the time of late Prime Minister Rabin, and the second time, the time of Prime Minister Ehud Barak. There was not an agreement. But the discussion was with the government. And here is the common links in the chain. Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all of them are states with governments. The Palestinians never had a state. And this is another, another factor, another variable in the difficulties. From 1949, Jordan annexed the West Bank. The Arab League frowned upon it, but did nothing more than that. And no one created, from 49 to 67, no one created a Palestinian state. They perpetuated the Palestinian refugee issue everywhere. Now I'm a social and cultural anthropologist. Since 1967, I conducted a participant observation study among the refugee camps. I visited all the refugee camps in the West Bank and in Gaza many, many times. I stayed overnights many times in the camps. In 1982, I visited the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. In 1994, after the peace agreement that was signed between Jordan and Israel, before I went to see Petra, I went to the refugee camps. What did I find out? I found out that there is already a fourth generation that were born, people that were born in the camps. The third generation already got married. Yes, they remember the places where their grandparents and great-grandparents came from. But they married women from the environment, not only from the camps where they came from. And what happened? They belong now to that environment. Now, I am an Israeli, I am Jewish. Some people can say, this is what you found out. Maybe it's not that objective. Dr. Ami Pedatsur showed you in a chart a study by a very good scholar, Khalil Shkaki. He conducts researches and studies all the time. And another study that he conducted just recently among the entire Palestinian refugee camps. I couldn't go to some of the camps that he went. But he covered the entire Palestinian refugee camp. 74% of the people who dwell in the camps said that they don't think to go back to Israel. 74% of them. It is a political flag. And because of the political flag, the problem was not solved since 1948. They deserve better than that. They live in slums. They deserve that their life would be changed. And how can you change it? There was a conference on the Palestinian refugee issue. It was published in a book, All Problem, New Solution. 10 Arabs, 10 Israelis, and 5 Americans participated in that study, and each one of them wrote a paper with a proposal that can be applied, not a theoretical proposal, but a practical proposal. A Palestinian, the vice president of Bethlehem University and director of the university, academic president of the university, Professor Manuel Hassassian, said that Israel should agree to the right of return on the theoretical basis, but the return will be to the West Bank. An Egyptian scholar said that we have, in the name of Dr. Bayedin El-Ibrashi, said that we have to solve the problem in a regional framework. We cannot think about one place or another place. And if to solve it on a regional framework, he suggested that in Sudan, and I quote an Egyptian scholar, in Sudan, there are hundreds of square miles along the Nile River that with Egyptian and Israeli expertise, we can change that place to a paradise and there will be an economic attraction for them. I don't think it's a good idea, because I don't think that to move them to any place will be a good idea. The only place, if we want to solve the problem, will be to rebuild those camps, to start from the outskirts of the camp, and they deserve to live in the modern world of the 21st century. And then to build modern schools with computers, with all the other modern equipment, to build kindergartens, playgrounds, health centers, clinics, and to build factories where they can work. Now, the psychological issue, the relationship to a Palestinian state, thank you. They can get dual citizenship. In Jordan, they have a Jordanian citizenship. They have a Jordanian passport. Lebanon is the only country that all the time repeats itself and says, no way that the refugees will stay in Lebanon. For 55 years, they say, no way that they will stay in Lebanon. But if in Lebanon there will be factories, and there will be also working places for Lebanese, Lebanon will change the statement. So there will be a Lebanese, they will have a Lebanese passport and a Palestinian passport. They will be able to vote in the Palestinian state. There will be relationship, interactions and relationships between them and the Palestinian state. It is the field of Professor Arnon Sofer, water, not only demography. He's one of the specialists in the world on water. There's not water. And as you saw earlier, as I mentioned earlier, there is not working places for the Palestinians who dwell in the West Bank now. So you cannot move them to the West Bank. But if they have the dual citizenship, then it will be easier from the psychological or social psychological point of view. To sum it up, I would say that it's a time to solve the Palestinian refugee problem. When we start to implement the roadmap, we have to start immediately looking at that issue. The international community, among them Israel, will have to help to solve the problem. But the only physical place that they can have their future in the 21st century will be to rebuild the camps, to change these slums to a 21st century modern buildings. Thank you.
The last speaker on the panel this evening is Professor Ron Robin. I found out today that he has a PhD from Berkeley in American history. His field is American media and politics, and he's also the Dean of Students at Haifa University. His title for his talk is The Theater of Terror.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's with a certain amount of reluctance that I pulled myself out of my chair. This little traveling circus has quite a lot of mileage on it at this point, and somehow my colleagues continuously manage to amaze me with new insight and new ideas that I haven't heard before. And I would have really liked to remain in the chair here and heard a little bit more. I preface my talk with a very brief apology and a very brief explanation. I first of all apologize that I'm not an expert in the Middle East, and I really can offer very few insight on what is happening in the Middle East today. As Professor Mattisol mentioned, my field is American culture and society, and I'm very glad I'm not the only odd fish here and that you join me here at this table. An explanation as well, I'm afraid I will offer you no predictions. My track record on predictions is miserable, to say the least. I've miscalculated all recent events, and as a historian, a person trained in the field of history, I've decided I shall go back to predicting the past rather than the future. The subject of my talk under this title of the Theatre of Terror is to try and understand the symbiotic relationship between media and terror, the manner in which Western media reports on terror events, and whether I know some of the people in this audience, some of them I met last night, are a little upset about this, whether there is any possibility of any change in the near future on this particular subject. I begin by dispelling a few myths which I'm sure you've all dispelled by yourself beforehand. But just to clarify the direction of my talk, I should probably go over them. First of all, I hope you agree with me that there's no such thing as objective journalism. Even the concept of giving equal time to any side of any argument is not objective journalism. It is making a very strong statement. The idea of all the news that is fit to print, in my mind, is somewhat meaningless and perhaps even close to nonsense. And that is the first little myth I would like to dispel here. The second one, and I hope here as well, I would assume that most of you agree with me, that electronic journalism, in particular TV, is first and foremost a form of infotainment. It is not there to inform us, it's there to entertain us, to keep us riveted to the screen until the next commercial so that we may buy the next product on the way. Electronic journalism is show business. It has been called a number of things. It's been called terror vision. It's been called all sorts of things. I hope you agree with that as well. Now, I would like to discuss very briefly the connection between media and terror. And of course, I'm the wrong person here to try and give you a clear-cut definition of what terror is all about. I won't even hazard a guess. I would like to spend the little time that I have at my disposal discussing made-for-media terror. And I think you all are pretty much aware of what I'm speaking about. Most of the incidents that we have seen in the past years, and here I differ slightly from my colleague Ami, is made-for-media terror. In that sense, I mean that terrorism is aimed at the people watching and not at the actual victims. The victims are merely a supporting cast. And I think this is a point that I need to reiterate time and time again. I think the type of terrorism we are talking about is not really about death and destruction, but rather about creating fear, sowing suspicion, undermining confidence in our system of government, and so on and so forth. In other words, it's an assault on our psychology, and the assault on our bodies is almost incidental. Now, to be effective, these modes of terrorism need to really be what we call, in our professional jargon, a media event. They are carefully scripted to the constraints of media. Media provides the stage, but if the act of terror does not conform to the demands and constraints of media, it will never happen. And that has to do, of course, with timing. An act of terror has to be a short burst. It has to do with technological constraints, the availability of cameras, access to the site of the incident. It has to do, of course, with dramatic effects such as unexpectedness and the use of props. It has to take into consideration such important factors as audience fatigue. If a certain terror organization continuously uses the same props, why, we'll lose interest. And so one day it must be a bus of children, the next day maybe soldiers standing at a bus stop, the following day a cafe in Haifa, and so on and so forth. And finally, it also needs to be very, very predictable. Now, as any movie buff knows, and we all are movie buffs here, I assume, in this audience, knowing how a plot ends by no means detracts appeal from the event. In fact, we need familiar images. It almost enhances its appeal. And when we think back at the most dramatic incidents of made-for-media terror, let's say 9/11, for example, the sentence that leaps to mind, it was just like a movie. It was just like a scene out of a movie, or something along those lines. Now, what is important to understand that the media when confronted with such events, is voluntarily submissive. This is a sort of like a symbiotic relationship involved over here. The media in the Western world is hooked on violence. A typical viewer, as you know, in the United States will probably see 21 criminal acts a week watching TV. All of us in this room, if we watch TV in any particular evening of the week, we will probably absorb 2 entertaining murders per night. We're hooked on violence. And in that sense, the media, when confronted with such made-for-media terror activities, is a very submissive victim. These, of course, are not new, and there's nothing new about made-for-media terror. We have to go back. I would guess that the first incident would be the 1972 Munich Olympics, as you all remember. 800 million people were riveted to the screen in 1972. If we look at the Twin Towers, 9/11, I really wouldn't even hazard a guess how large the audience, the international audience, was, but I think we could all agree that this was the most successful made-for-TV production of all times. In other words, I think as long as if we do not understand that most of these acts are made for media consumption, it will be very difficult to come up with any sort of significant and meaningful solution how to stop these type of events. Given the time constraints, I leave it at that and I move on to another subject which I know bothers many people in this room, as it, of course, concerns me, at least professionally. Why, many people have asked me during the course of the last few days, does the media portray acts of terror in somewhat of an understanding fashion? Why are we always shown the other side of the coin? And this question, I think we can sort of scrutinize it better if we compare this into the manner in which other acts of violence are covered on TV. Now let's just, for an example, think about a crime wave which might hit Houston, God forbid, in the near future. And we know very well how the media in general and electronic media in particular would react to such an event. We would hear on TV and we would read in the newspapers a lot of outrage at the fact that there are not enough police officers on the street, that the criminal justice system is not prosecuting these acts in a manner that it should be. We would hear very little about the other side, about the social and psychological reasons for criminals acting in the manner they do. This does not happen, of course, when the media covers terror, and I would like very briefly to offer you some thoughts on that matter, why this happens to be. The media very often tries to give us what we call, how would we call this, the root cause explanation. 9 times out of 10, after an act of terror takes place and we see the horrific scenes on the TV screens, we are offered by experts and sometimes by people who are a little less than experts some sociological explanations and sometimes some political explanations for these acts of terror. And many people have asked me, why does this happen? Why does not the media just focus on the act of terror, and why does it move to present terrorists in an understanding manner? And without even expressing an opinion on this particular subject, I would like to hazard a guess at why the media continuously and will probably predictably move on to supply us with a bunch of root cause explanations for acts of terror, something which I'm sure appeals to some people in the audience and I'm sure angers others. Well, there are all sorts of explanations, and I'll just offer maybe 2 or 3. I think the first one, it's kind of a pop psychology type of explanation, is that we all need to manage anxiety. Violence is very frightening, and terrorist violence is especially so, because, of course, victims are 9 times out of 10 innocent. And a frightened audience seeks information. We want reasons. We don't believe, very few of us believe in unadulterated evil. We believe even if a very evil act takes place, there must be some underlying cause behind this. We want to know how such an act could have happened. And so the explanations on the psychological or social or economic or political reasons come out of the media under these circumstances. I think another reason is also ignorance. Most of us in the audience, not all of us of course, but most of us are secular people, and we usually seek secular explanations for phenomena that we confront. But the issue we are dealing with is very far from a secular issue. The groups that have been spoken about today, Islamic Jihad and Hamas, are millenarian groups. They have an apocalyptical worldview. The role of death in these particular groups that we've been speaking about today is very different from our concept of death, at least as practiced in the Judeo-Christian worldview. Death is something to be embraced rather than the ultimate sacrifice. And I wonder, and my colleagues here would be able to give a better explanation than myself, whether the translation of the word shaheed to martyr is a very good translation, because the concept of martyrdom suggests sacrifice, while my understanding of events suggests that many of the perpetrators of such events embrace death and do not see it as a sacrifice. And in this sense, we somehow funnel ourselves towards secular explanations, trying to seek economic, political, whatever behind this. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that there are not economic, political, and social misdeeds that we might have perpetrated among the Palestinians in the past, but that is not a very good explanation for what is happening. If we do not understand the religious roots of such actions, we will never understand them at all. And I would offer one more explanation for the way the media covers terror. I would call it a post-colonial explanation. Let me explain what I mean. We have a tendency, as liberal people with a liberal outview, almost instinctively to assign blame to ourselves when a Western society clashes with a third world society. This goes back, of course, to the aftermath of World War II, in which we, to one degree or another, accepted blame for some of the problems in third world countries. But this can go overboard, and I do believe we are going overboard with this particular subject in recent years. The post-colonial impulse to accept blame for everything, for every type of consequence to a clash between Western societies and third world societies is part of our culture, it's part of the media culture, but I think it is, in this particular case, misses the target by quite a large margin. And we look back on possibly one more explanation I will mention, and I will conclude with that, is the journalist's commitment to balanced reporting. Now, I think this is the right thing to do. All reporting should be balanced. But I think there is no balance between victims and perpetrators in such acts. There is no other side in these sort of acts. And balanced reporting is not necessarily objective reporting. Is there anything to be done about this particular issue? I think not. I think this is the way the Western media works. I do not think it will change in the foreseeable future. And all I can really offer is an explanation, as I mentioned before, rather than a solution. I do, however, feel very bad about being the last speaker here, and ending my talk on such a gloomy note. We've heard a lot of doom and dire predictions during the last 2 hours or so, and I really would like to end my little talk here on an optimistic note. And as Professor Mattisau has mentioned, I'm Dean of Students at the university, and as you've heard from our president and others, this is a very pluralistic university with about 18-19% of our students are Arab Israelis. We have, by the way, more Ethiopian students, that is, more black students at our university than all the other Israeli universities put together. And I can go on and so forth, describing the wonderful mosaic of Israeli society represented at our university. And we've gone through very hard times. And last year we lost 4 students, 3 Jews and 1 Arab, in different suicide bombing attacks. And recently a bus on its way to the university was blown up by a suicide bomber, and 17 young individuals lost their lives. And I've seen how our students on campus, Jews and Arabs, have handled this matter in a very heroic fashion and a very rational fashion. And it is my understanding from these events, that there is hope for the future. and that hope lies in education. The instilling of middle-class Western values is the hope for the future. I'm sure a fence or a military solution or anything else will bring short-term solutions to the area, but a civic society based on middle-class Western values, as we have seen at our university and other universities in the country, is really the major hope for the future. How we will bring this about in the entire Middle East, I really don't have an answer to that, but I thank you for your attention.
We didn't exactly hit 6 o'clock on the nose, but we were very close. So we have about 25 minutes for a Q&A, and anybody who would like to start us off, please do. Yes?
I'd like to put my question to Professor Ginat about the hudna. We did have some sort of a hudna in the past few months, which dissipated into continued renewed fighting. But as I understand it, the hudna was not between Israel and any Palestinian body, but between some of the Palestinians themselves. They insisted on that, if I understood right, that the hudna is not between them and us, but between the Hamas and the Palestinian Jihad. And am I right in presuming that? And also, do you think that semantics will solve the problem? That if we call it hudna and not armistice, it will succeed, or they will go along with us? Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, there is a lack of information. There was not a hudna between the Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Palestinian Authority. They didn't use the term hudna. The Palestinian terrorist organization wanted to leave an open door. And it was in the media, it is not your fault, that there was a hudna. But they used the Arabic term between them and the Palestinian Authority, waqf an-nar, to stop the fire. So it was not hudna. And this is what I claim, that they are very careful in using this term. So if they are careful in using this term and they didn't use it, maybe we can succeed. What I claim is that so far we didn't move forward. So far it is a bloodshed. So far we didn't succeed in any one of the other proposals. Why not to give it a try? If we give it a try and use the term hudna and they sign the hudna, and in historical perspective we know that in historical times that the hudna was kept, not only when it was between Muslims and Muslims, between Muslims and Christians. So why not to give it a try? If you don't succeed, you don't lose anything.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Gilbert Gertner. I mentioned that when you gentlemen, and I'm very impressed with the panel from the University of Haifa. As a matter of fact, when you go back to the university, you'll see my name on the Founders Wall and on the Levi Eshkol building. And I also attended July 4th, 1976, an international board meeting of the University of Haifa, which was a very historic day. That was the day when we arrived in Israel, that the Entebbe hostages returned as well. The question that I have, and I've been listening to the panel, and of course, as a matter of age, I listened to what's going to happen in the year 2030 and 2070 and so on, which is very interesting. It doesn't have any effect on my immediate life and most of the people here. If we reduced it to a minimum, basic separation between the Israelis and the Palestinians, let's say the Green Line, whether it be a wall or just a separation, could there be an immediate peace, or at least a short period of peace, or are we just destined to have this problem come up time and time again, where there's an impasse between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and eventually they're just going to fight and fight and fight, as has been happening for centuries? Could there be a peace in the immediate future if a wall was put up on a green line. Thank you.
Anyone want to answer that one?
Yeah. I think that at the moment we cannot wait for a peace. As I told you, there is no reason for Arafat to reach an agreement, a final agreement. He has just to wait. Now, go back to the Hamas and the Jihad. Maybe they are now around 40 to 50% of the population. They admit simply, we are going for the destruction of Israel completely. So we don't have partner at the moment, and the demography is ticking away. So therefore, it's so important to take unilateral decision. And if it is on the green line or 2 kilometers east,